It is now. Tell them to calm down. Okay, so it's up there now, that kind of thing. And again, so this is my take on the world based on my professional experience. I've been doing this for about 19 years. And then obviously what I've gone through personally. This is what I was talking about, these terms. And whereas I challenge this, and I think this is more of a trauma response, a learned behavior that serves a purpose in the time, but over time it becomes encoded, and it actually, the behavior that was providing you relief starts to cause you more problems than it was worth. But since it's a natural behavior, a habitual behavior, a relieving behavior, you continue to engage in it even though you shouldn't. So I want to talk about it in those terms. And the reason is you have to understand the actual problem that you're trying to fix in order to best fix it, if that makes sense. There's a sport called hockey, ice hockey. I know y'all down here in the South don't know anything about it, right? It involves, there's like a stick and a puck that you're trying to hit through a net. Okay? Wait. There is a hockey team here in town. All right, I didn't need to do all that then. All right. So in the early 90s, actually would have been the mid 90s, late 90s, that kind of thing. The Pittsburgh Penguins went through an incredible slump. Couldn't win anything, couldn't do anything. Started getting all these really high draft picks, and you guys all probably heard the name Sidney Crosby, right? And then there was a person that they drafted after Crosby named Evgeny Malkin. Okay, he was from Russia. Incredible player, and but when they first rolled him out, got him on the ice, he struggled immensely. Wasn't producing any points, wasn't producing any goals, and they kept working with him. And they would work with him on his shot, they would work with him on his hustle and his grit and his defense. They kept working with him, and nothing would work, nothing would work, nothing would work. They thought the problem was him, they thought the problem was the way he was handling the puck, but it turns out they brought in a coach from Russia who talked about this, and they moved him from Crosby's line to the second line, and they moved him from left wing to center. And he exploded. He's been one of the best players in the league. He's won the MVP of the playoffs. He's won the league MVP. And the reason that they finally got that right is because they actually diagnosed the problem the correct way. They could have spent the rest of his career trying to fix his shot. But the problem was he was playing out of position. So you can spend all day trying to figure out how to handle yourself because you're an enabler or you're codependent. And it's not necessarily going to change your response to situations if that's not actually the problem. If the problem is it's a deep-seated fear that's triggered by your loved one's behavior, then you're going to have to try to get to that deep-seated fear and start to redirect it. Rather than just be told, hey, you're codependent, knock it off. Detach. Just say no, right? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And you got to be really careful, guys. You got to be careful. You guys have heard this. You get this knee-jerk automatic advice from people. I don't know how many people have experienced that. I've experienced that in all kinds of different aspects of my life. Not just, related to dealing with substance use in a family member or mental health in a family member. It's just, here's how you do it. If that was my kid, I'd tell you what, he wouldn't be acting like that. He'd be out. That kind of thing. Unfortunately, sometimes professionals will do that. The first thing is, because you look at these situations like, yeah, these kids, look at this mom and dad, the kids got it all together. What are they doing right? I should definitely listen to them. Got to be careful. Looks are deceiving. Right? The image that's put out there and the way people appear, this is an extreme example. This is cracking on Facebook, right? Because you can definitely control what you see on social media. But even without social media, people kind of put on a front. And so, whereas you might judge you or how you're handling the kid and whether or not you're setting clear enough boundaries or whether or not you should have pushed the person out or done this or done that, they may not actually have it going on the way it looks. So take every piece of advice you get, take it with a grain of salt, and check out the source. Get second opinions. Learn more from other people. You don't even necessarily listen to me. Like I said earlier, I'm giving you one person's take on this. Get advice on how you should handle your particular situation. All right? hopefully this will make sense as we go through, because I'm going to lay an argument out on how to approach this. We've talked about this in here before. A lot of folks, you guys have been here. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this because I think you've heard it. We know that addiction is a brain disease that involves, it's more than just knock it off. It's different than partying too much. It involves the depletion of dopamine over time. The person starts to make incredibly irrational decisions, using despite their own will, using despite their own best judgment. The part of your brain that makes decisions, pros and cons, kind of goes offline, and you're run by your instincts. We've used all kinds of different analogies related to that. Like, if I starved you for 3 days, and I took you to a pizza shop and told you not to eat, your instincts would kick in, and you would go act against, even if I said there's a reward at the end. You know, if you can hold off, you would likely act against the delayed gratification to get the reward. You would go and you would eat because what? It's survival. And I think what people who haven't been through addiction have trouble understanding, and I get it, is that it does move to that level. And it's different than making a decision. So like it's Friday night, everybody's going out, they're going downtown, should I go along or not? That's kind of a decision-making process, right? That's the person, he's weighing it out. But this is different. This is automatic pilot. Let me go get this. Let me go get this stuff. Let me take another drink. Let me get another pill. Let me get another hit. Whatever it may be, because it's not about catching a buzz. It's not about having a good time. It's not about trying to get high. It's about trying to feel normal. Okay? And we use this slide that indicates the depletion of dopamine in a person's brain if they're using it for a chronic period of time. Nobody can say, how long does it take to get there? And the truth is, no one can say to another person, that's your brain. You get that? Like, you can't do that. We just don't have the capability. And imagine there are some places around the country that are doing this. We're not doing this in Greenville. Maybe it would help. I joke all the time that if we took guys a favor and put them through the PET scan and said, look, you're addicted, they'd be like, put me through again. Put me through again. Being here to have the same guy 1,000 times till we got the results he wanted, right? So there's part of this where the person has to kind of be convinced. Have you guys gone through that? Where they just don't think it's a problem. Everybody drives their car into a tree. Everybody drinks that much. You should see who I hang out with. And there's probably a lot of truth to that. We tend to select certain folks when we're out there doing our thing. But this is completely different than just having a really wild time on a Friday night. So does anyone have any questions about that process? Anybody have any questions or anything I can clarify? Because I think as a parent or a spouse, this is something I would want to get clear in my mind. It's going to influence how you respond to the situations you're dealing with. If you don't buy that, you're going to have this predisposition to do what? Argue, angry, debate. You're going to have this thing in the back of your mind that he should just knock it off, and it'll come through in all your interactions. And you don't want to get in a situation where you're acting emotionally. They're already irrational. When I'm in active addiction, I'm already irrational. If my family is also irrational, nothing's going to get done. So you want to try to avoid the argument, the debate, the fight, and rise above this. And the thing that gets in the way is a lot of folks don't necessarily buy this. You guys might be different. You're here tonight. You obviously are taking stock of the situation. So for you, I might be preaching to the choir. But does anybody have any questions about that or anything I can clear up? All right. Yes, sir.
If you were an alcoholic and you decided to start drinking again,
Yes.
does your brain automatically go back to the way it was?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is, what if you kind of put it down for a while and you start to move in the right direction, but then you pick it back up? Will it revert to this? So here's the best way to answer that. It's exceedingly vulnerable, and it's going to revert to that if you do it too long. Now, if you immediately get back on track, if it's a situation, let's say, for example, I went out tonight because some guys from Pittsburgh came down and, hey, what's going on? We went out and I had a good time. Woke up tomorrow, regret, remorse, and jumped right back on the wagon. I'm probably not going back. You'd have to do it for a while before it fully goes back. But the interesting thing is, it seems that once your brain kind of goes there, you're exceedingly vulnerable for it to go back. This is why we encourage people to look at like total abstinence and not using other substances while they're trying to do this thing, because it'll slip you into that process. Now we're really, we want to meet you where you're at, talk about that. We're not going to require total abstinence to be part of our program, but that's the danger, that you would be messing around with this. And it's also the biggest thing that people struggle with. If you want an honest answer, like people struggle with the idea. A lot of folks who have been labeled in denial aren't actually in denial. They know it's a problem. What they are is they're struggling with accepting the idea that they can't do anything. Does that make sense? And I can't ever do this again. They don't kind of get this. They don't necessarily think, yeah, I know I got to stay away from heroin. Yes, I know I have to stay away. I can't drink like I was, but I can drink a little bit every now and then. And but the danger is, I mean, it's kind of like you're just playing with fire if you're going down that road.
What about the kids who have used the harder drugs, if you will, and then say, well, I can smoke this to roll off?
It's the same thing.
Okay.
It's the same idea. I will tell you, kids, and by kids I mean even 20-somethings, that's the hardest thing that they struggle with. And it's, by the time I got here, I was 31, and I had all these experiences with all these different substances, and every time I had tried anything to kind of like manageably use recreationally, it never worked. So I guess I had all this information and experience that made it, I think, a little bit easier for me to accept. I will tell you, like, when I talk to people in that age range, they really push back on that. If they're honest, they push back on it. Not all of them. Many people will accept it. Some people will accept it, but many push back because it's hard. It's hard to make that type of commitment and call yourself, I am an addict, I am an alcoholic.
What about this movement right now where it was on Facebook on one of the parents' pages that we shouldn't call them an addict because that's degrading and all that stuff?
Well, I believe that. I believe the word addict and alcoholic don't really serve a purpose, okay? The idea of labeling anybody anything is hard for people to accept. And the reason that they're saying that, though, is a little bit different than what I'm saying. There's been a lot of work done from focus groups. Here, the best example I can give. Do you ever see when a presidential election is going on, or even like congressional elections, they'll do focus groups on the candidates, and they'll hook them up to these machines, and they test how people react as the candidate is talking. And they're trying to see, like, do they actually like this candidate? So what they did was they did the same thing around recovery-related words, and they hooked them up. And what they found was words like addict and alcoholic engendered the same type of response as Hitler, rape, murder. So to the general public, not to you folks. Do you guys get that? They didn't do these tests on you. This was to the world. And I got to tell you, like, you guys come into this group, you got to remember something. You have a very unique view on this issue. We have to understand that the majority of people don't think of it the way that we think of it. And when they hear the word drug addict, they do not think like Rich in recovery. Does that make sense? Or even, Rich when he was using and he was employed. What do they think of? They think of the guy who's holding up the convenience store to get a hit. They think of the caricature and what went down on during the crack cocaine epidemic, and how that was vilified, and how the media covered that. The majority of people that were using cocaine in the 1980s were middle-class white people. But the images you saw on TV were African-American men selling crack cocaine and getting arrested by police and SWAT teams kicking in doors. So that's what they think. Do you guys get that? And that's why you're seeing people say, let's move away from that and let's start talking differently about it. All right, so you guys are dealing with this. You're dealing with an irrational person in a chronic situation that is not going to change overnight. It's going to take several tries, or it's going to take a long time till you start to sleep at night. Okay, you're going through it. And one of the things that's happening along the way is people that are dealing with addiction they're not the most obedient folks in the world, are they? Not necessarily showing up for work. They tend to steal your silverware. PlayStations go missing. Circular saws from Home Depot. It's all, it's Katie bar the door, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And you guys are sitting there watching it, and you know this is not good, and you're worried, and you're scared, and also maybe they're taking advantage of you, and you start to think of this idea of, what do I do? How do I deal with this? And people start giving you advice. Kick them out. Call the police. Quit paying the rent. And that's all fine and good. But we want to talk more about boundaries, the word boundaries. And this idea that they're not rules. Because rules, what's the downside to creating rules? In any relationship, what's the downside? They will be broken. Rules will be broken. And if you create them, and if you create too many of them, what's going to happen? You're setting this situation up where you're going to have to follow through, because remember, we always say, mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. And if you say you can't live here, if you continue to do drugs, then y'all got to follow through on that. So you're setting it up and like, boom, cracking heads. And that's not the best way to think about it. Think about it more like, how do I want to be treated? What's okay to come into my world? And I'm going to talk to the person about that part of the process. And if their behavior doesn't align with my health, my welfare, my sanity, you can't be part of my life anymore. I always say stuff like that, and people will be like, well, Rich, that's just another way of saying it. It is just another way of saying it, but it's an important way of saying it. Because it's not about controlling another person at that point. It's about, this is how I want to be treated. Okay? You know, we talked in here many times about the example of the kid who goes off to rehab. He comes home, and well, it probably happens while he's in rehab. You get a call, and they want to talk about a contract. How many people have heard about a contract? Good God, can you think that we want to put together a contract? Wow. So we're going to put together a contract, and the contract's going to include curfew. And the curfew is, you're like, well, what time? I don't know what time. What's reasonable for a 20-year-old to be in? You know? Well, I got to get up for work. He's got to be in by midnight. Okay? Now, I've been sleeping for 4 hours by the time midnight gets here. Well, not quite, but maybe I've been asleep for 2 hours by the time midnight gets here. If you're 20 years old, you're just getting up by the time midnight gets. You get it? Like, you're just going out. You're not even halfway through the night. So you come in at midnight. The rule is, the curfew is, come in at midnight. So the kid goes out, he comes in. What do you have to do? You got to follow through. You got to take the car. But he was late because he had to stop and get gas. He got in at 12:30 because he had to stop and get gas. Take the car, though. It's a rule. Do you guys get it? It's a rule. Take the car. Don't be a pushover. And now the kid is like totally frustrated. He's calling his buddies for rides. Who knows what's going on? You get where I'm coming from? It's all this situation. So what if you think more about a boundary, and you talk same kind of situation, but you don't get into a contract. You simply say, this is what I need if you're going to live in our house. I got to get up for work at 6:30, Monday through Friday. Okay? I cannot sleep until you're in the door. I don't know what that's all about, but like when you're in, I finally relax and I fall asleep. You're going to have to come in at midnight, man, because I can't do that. Okay? It's not a rule. And then let's say he comes in at 12:30 because he had to get gas. What do you do differently then? You sit down and talk to him and say, we talked about how that affects me, right? Tell me what happened. He explains to you what it was. You decide you're going to accept it. Do you get that? It's not a rule. Nobody got over. You guys are literally communicating around the boundary. And then that allows you more opportunity to work through things. I don't understand. So one of the things about my background is, I've spent a lot of time doing family therapy and working in a place where like the family was emphasized. I don't know if it was the culture of the system I worked in or if this is just how it is all across Western Pennsylvania, but we didn't do stuff without the family. I can't understand the advice that a professional would give to like tell mom and dad to like set it up for that let's bang heads kind of stuff. And as if there's a right way or a wrong way to parent, and literally as if there's a hard ass award out there for the parents. We're going to nominate you for the 2019 hard ass. You didn't let anyone get over on you. I don't get it. It's not really how human beings are designed to be. It's not how we're designed to even be in a family. If you think about the most successful period of time in terms of parenting, if you look at it like in terms of the general outcomes and welfare around kids, now there was a lot of stuff different then, but it was whenever most families lived on a farm, okay? When we were an agrarian society, anybody have an idea on why that was so successful? Anybody want to take a shot at it?
You have your responsibility.
You had responsibilities, and it wasn't about dads in charge. It was literally like, look, if we don't plow the field, we're all going to die. Okay? If we don't go out and take care of these cows, we're all dead. And it was like, I don't want to do it. And people literally had to work together as a family to figure it out. And that continued to carry through. But it's gotten strange where it's kind of like we want to control everything so much where parents have to be like, I don't know, like it's a contract. Like it's an employment contract. My relationship with my kids is not an employment contract. It never will. I've told you guys this story. When my daughter was leaving Carolina Behavioral Health, I knew that they were going to want a contract. And I knew what the deal was. And I went in and I said, under no conditions will I kick her out. Okay? Because it wasn't going to be part of the conversation. All right? And then we talked through some other stuff and we kind of worked it out. But I knew that I would never be able to do that. You guys get it? So I took it off the table right from the jump. Now I happen to know that's what was going to go down, if that makes sense. So be careful of painting yourself in a corner, if that makes sense. Be careful of setting yourself up for situations where you just absolutely have to maybe do something that your better judgment says, nah. And I'm telling you, it comes off different with the receiver of the boundary than it does with a rule. If you don't follow through on a rule, there's this idea of what? Okay, they're not serious about this. If you negotiate a boundary, we're communicating. And again, you can say like that's semantics, but there's a lot of truth to that, guys. And it what's the word? It totally transcends drug and alcohol addiction. It's kind of like family therapy 101. So keep that in mind. There will be some limits along the way. There will be things that you have to say. Those are typically like one or two areas. Things like you cannot use in my house. Does that make sense? Or whatever it might be. That kind of thing. You have to maintain. There tends to be like one or two sort of like black and white areas, but the rest is kind of like managing yourself as you work through this stuff, and then you develop these healthy boundaries. So I don't want to say that you'll never have a rule, because you typically, especially where addiction is concerned, one of the major rules is about you can't use that kind of thing. Yes.
With that same daughter of yours, if she didn't follow the boundaries that y'all set, like she continued to come in late, she continued to use, come home drunk, whatever,
Well,
would you come to the point that you might say you can't come back?
not where I'm at right now in my life, I wouldn't. If it went on for 5 years, maybe I would. If it went on for 10 years, maybe I would. But I cannot conceive a situation that would make me say that. Okay? And if people told me to do that, I would literally just leave my presence, get away from my radius, and don't come back again. You know what I mean? I would not even begin to entertain that as a possibility.
But we didn't say she couldn't come around us. We said we would go around her, but she couldn't live in the house.
No, you got to understand, and this is the other thing. This is different for different people. We got to emphasize this. This could be completely different for your situation. Well, the circumstances have a lot to do with it. And what do I mean by that? There are some circumstances where you need to ask the person to leave for your benefit. Does that make sense? Not out of a behavioral concern. Literally, this is not good for us. Especially if people are using, what you'll see, depending on the escalation of drug use, a lot of times you get into some pretty bizarre stuff going on. I feel like that's a whole different thing. I feel like that's self-preservation. That wasn't the situation that I was dealing with. You know what I mean? Do you guys get that? I want to emphasize that. I'm talking about my particular circumstance. You have got to weigh the individual situation that you're in. And you have, remember, we said this last week, you have a right to live a safe and pleasant and content life. You do not have to sacrifice your welfare or your safety for your loved one. And that's a fact, right? Everybody agree?
Yes.
So, and you have to figure that out. And that's the part where I don't know that anyone can tell you exactly, what to do with that. Because what's more important than anything with that is where you're at with it and whether or not you can do it and just exactly how you feel about it. You know what I mean? Like, how is that going to be for you? Is that going to be, like, actually worse than having the person live there? And the only person that knows that is you. Now, you might talk to a therapist or a coach or a group, maybe like an Al-Anon group or something, or trusted people who will help you figure that out as you talk out loud. But you get it, like, it's ultimately a very individualized decision. There's no, like, one-size-fits-all for that solution. A little bit more about this when you think about it. So actually, it's interesting. So if I have, my situation with my daughter or my son, whenever he went through, here's something I'll tell you right now. This is a 100% honest disclosure. When my son, I think I've shared this before, was like 20 or 19, he goes to college, he goes to University of Pittsburgh, and goes berserkers, okay? In every sense of the word. Whatever I can get a hold of, I'm going to use. Whatever I can do, I'm going to use, right? All that stuff. And all the things that go with it in terms of, I don't even know if you could call it academic performance. I wouldn't even call it that. I would call it like academic abuse, whatever it was. So, everything goes on, yank him out of school. Didn't even really yank, like, I'm not doing this anymore is what I said. And he comes home. He's there. I'm like, you can stay here under these conditions. He says, I don't know if I can do that. And I said, well, where do you want to go? And he said, I want to go to his fiance now. It's his girlfriend at the time. I want to go to Chrissy's house. So basically, I drop him off at a bus station. I remember driving away from that. He was sitting on his suitcase. He had like $10 that I'd given him, and he was the happiest dude in the world. And this is like very inappropriate. It's clearly like gender bias on my part. But I was able to do that. Do you get it? So even in my family, there was like two different approaches. But you want to know what? Like, if I could kind of live with that. I mean, the kid had gone everywhere, done everything. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't the case with my daughter. So I would lose my noodle if I went that way. Does that make sense? And so I guess what I'm empowering you or encouraging you to do to, like, don't do exactly what I did, but think it through and based on your individual experiences. And also, Carolyn, what's a really good example is where your daughter's at in the process and how that unfolds over time.
Being very violent.
Yeah, and also,
Her father
yep.
was disabled.
Yep. And so what will happen is you will have different experiences down the road. You follow me? Like, things change, people change. You got to go back to that picture of what it's like to be in active addiction, man. Like, especially with some of this stuff, right? You're just gone. It's not good. So you got to protect yourself. And in doing so, you're going to have your personal boundaries, and then there are going to be team boundaries. We talked about this last week. Your personal boundaries are a little bit easier. That's like, how do I want to be treated? Okay? The team, it's hard to avoid the team, right? Because that's mom and dad. That's, mom and wife. That's the other people who have to get involved. But no matter what's going on, you can start to think about how do you want to be treated. Okay? And then who are the other people that need to get involved in this? So regardless of what's going on in your family, you can define, this is what's okay with me and this is what's not okay. Because a lot of times, right, like dad's on one page, mom's on another page, or maybe mom and dad are on the same page, but he can go over to grandma's and kick it, for the weekend, that kind of thing. Grandma's a good one to go to. You should get some money for mowing the yard. But you really didn't mow it. You theoretically mowed it. But you did a real good job. So she gave you $150, right? So there's a lot of people that probably should be thinking about this, but regardless, you can think about it. And remember, even though boundaries are for you, this is a really important point. I firmly believe this. Even though we're here talking about how do you take care of yourself and what are the boundaries for you, it can influence the outcome with your loved one. It's this idea, as you start to move, they start to move. As you start to move, they start to move. There are different things that you can do to change and increase the likelihood that they'll change. Any questions about that? You guys get that? Does that make sense?
Now, Rich, if they do on Q's and Q's and will behave at your house, but you know they're still acting out at home, do you have control over that, or do you?
No, you really don't. It's a good question. I mean, and I think that goes back to this slide. If you look at this, you can talk about when you're around me, this is what I expect, right? And so, and let's say the person does that, they're technically like, your boundaries have been respected. Now, if they go home and tear it up, that's where you'd have to get a team involved, and you have to talk about who else is impacted. You guys get that? You can only like establish your area. You can't speak, like a classic example is like maybe somebody is living, they're married, and there's a problem, and this maybe the wife sets a boundary, but the husband runs to his mom or his brother's house or whatever, and they okay it and kind of like pat him on the back. Maybe they use there and they party and they go at it. You can only hold your end of it. Now, we would encourage you to try to get them in a conversation, and we've created intervention teams, and we just had this training this past week where we're going to put together teams that can help you do that. But for you, it's your personal space. Do you guys get that? That's the only thing you can control, is how you respond. Any other questions about that part of it?
Rich,
Yes.
is anybody else burning up in here?
Yes.
I'm about to die. I don't-
Let me turn it down. Let me turn it down. I don't know. Why do they have the Why do they have the heat on? There we go. There. You can open the door too. Why do they have the freaking heat on in this building?
Because it's cold. It's winter.
Oh, this is winter. I got to drive up to Pittsburgh, take my son to University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and it's going to be like 3 degrees, dude. That's winter. All right. So here's typically some influence that you have. All right. If you think about how could you, and maybe you're saying to yourself, all right, I'm going to have these boundaries and things, but maybe I can get a 2-for-1 where whatever boundaries I set may also influence the other person into change. And this is just a very typical list, guys. The list on the right, on your right, is what a lot of people focus on, and that's usually where your mind goes. The most obvious influence you have is to change boundaries around finances. Okay? Maybe you're paying the person's rent. Maybe the person's living in your house and not doing anything all day, and you're kind of like, I don't know how long I can deal with this. That kind of stuff. Now remember, if you were doing that, you would want to frame it up in a way where it had to do with your own personal protection, not a rule. So how would you say it if it was about money? Let's say that you were paying, let's say the person was living in your basement, not making any moves, and you made a decision you're gonna like set a boundary about that. You could say, you know, you have to have a job or you have to leave. That's one way to do it, right? Another way to do it is to say something like this: I cannot live with myself contributing to your self-destruction. You know, every time I come home and I realize that you're there and I haven't done anything about it, I knock myself out all day. We can't continue to do this. You know, you got until like next Friday to make a move, man, and I love you no matter what, but I don't think I can deal with this anymore. You got the second one, what's going on is you're not challenging him in any way. It's not about you did this, you did that. You're not even telling him that he needs to like quit using. You're literally saying, I can't see this. And what you're looking for is to diffuse what? Diffuse the tension. And the other thing is, it's very hard for a person to argue with you about the way you feel. They can argue with you about everything else. Like you say, you've been living here for 20 years in the basement. It's not okay, and you're getting out by Friday. And then what can they do? They can pitch back. Yeah, what are you talking about? Everybody lives in the basement. Haven't you ever seen the movie Step Brothers? Anybody ever see that? It's a fine piece of artistic work. So you would want to talk about yourself, because nobody can look at you and say, you don't feel that way. That's not true. You don't feel that way. It doesn't break your heart to see me. To get that, that's very hard for another person to say. Again, just words, but words are very important. The financial stuff is usually very noticeable. Here's what's interesting. There's also this thing called emotional leverage. which is, do you want to start setting boundaries on the way that you interact with the person, and the emotional investment that occurs in the relationship, okay? Because typically what's happening, guys, is a lot of times the person is also connected at an emotional level because you're their family, and believe it or not, even though it's strained, they probably still want your approval. They probably still want to have a relationship. I know that's hard to understand, but think of the picture that I just showed you of the brain, okay? They did a survey of heroin addicts in New York City, and what they found was it was somewhere right around 80% of heroin addicts reported daily contact with their mother. Active heroin addicts in New York City, daily contact with their mother, okay? And when I say that to groups, I'll do that at trainings, usually like at and we'll say, and we'll say like, why do you think that was? What were they doing? What do you think most people say?
Money.
That's what everyone says, but it wasn't. The top reason was they would ask the families, did they ask for money? It was like, no, there was a percentage that asked for money, but that wasn't it. They were literally just trying to stay connected. Here's the deal. Remember when you were a little kid and you were sick? Who did you want? That still doesn't mean you're not setting boundary, guys. It's just understanding what's going on. You guys get that? This isn't about go home and give everybody a break. It's just that's what's happening, and you can use that to leverage the person into change. You can say things, but you don't even have to lie. You can literally say, like, when you call me on Friday nights and you're hammered and you want to talk, I understand that that you just need me and that you want to, you want to just talk and you need me to be there. I can't do it. It's killing me. It's killing me. I don't sleep after you call. I don't sleep for 3 days after you call. What that does is that works on the person's emotions, which, believe it or not, is just as powerful as the rent. It's just as powerful as the rent. But again, you would want to do it from a framework of what? How do I protect myself from this? You'll hear it. It's usually things like, one of the most common is this phone call kind of deal. It's just, for whatever reason, people will start using, especially alcohol. I have a term for it because when I was early on as a therapist, they used to call me and I would answer. I don't answer anymore, okay? But I used to think that I was like, I had to answer, And I used to call it smiling and dialing, right? Get tuned up and make a call and just want to talk and you need somebody who you feel like you're close to. And so you start to say, I can't take these calls. I can't. And they'll push back on that just like they would with money. But again, you put it through your own template. Other things, just ongoing relationship, seeking support, doesn't want to disappoint, goes back to the idea that this isn't coming from a rational place. Because there's a lot of you sitting there right now saying, that's BS, Rich. The way my kid acts, there's no question he or she could care less whether or not they disappoint. All right? Yeah, it's hard to remember kids in there. Here's another thing. Carolyn, how old's your daughter? All right, we got to remember this. This is exceedingly important. I keep forgetting to talk about this. From a developmental standpoint, from about the age of like 14 through, some people say 24, I think like certainly 21, probably 24, developmentally people are very, very self-centered. With or without drugs. Do you guys get that? It's literally like, well, I mean, from an evolutionary psychology point of view, it kept you alive to be very, very self-centered at that point in time. That's when you were getting kicked out of the cave. And it was good to be like very, very focused on yourself. It was good to be very, very self-centered until you kind of got older and you got established. Well, what's happening is that's what you're seeing with these 19-year-olds. That's what you're seeing. Like when you got somebody that young, and I'm telling you that's across the board, guys. That's not just people who've dealt with addiction.